Hello, I'm Harry Young, and welcome to episode 2 of the Box Pod. Today, we are delighted to be joined by Adam Robertson. Adam is an experienced actor who has also produced film and theatre at a commercial level. In addition to his work in the creative sector, Adam has managed several businesses over the years, set up and run his own companies, including co-founder in Western Edge Pictures, a street food business in London, and a restaurant in South Wales. A father of 4 boys, he is enthusiastic, confident, and passionate about the art of theatre and screen storytelling, and about empowering young people to trust their instincts and follow their dreams. Since 2016, he has been the lead facilitator for the charity Street Cones, developing and delivering creative projects in Scottish prisons, with young offenders and other marginalised groups, and has directed many short films using lived experienced individuals, most recently Something to Lose, a film about community payback orders. He runs workshops on acting for camera and audition techniques at Scottish universities and colleges and does motivational speaking, and he will be doing a course here at Box Hub over the course of the weekend. Today I'm going to have a bit of a chat with Adam about his upbringing and what inspired him to get into the creative arts, a bit about his journey from Thurso to 4 years in River City, what inspired him to come up to Scotland, and finding a bit more about the work he has done in Scottish prisons to help use the arts to rehabilitate young offenders. Adam, welcome to the Box Pod.
Thank you very much, Harry. It's nice to be with you.
So first of all, I think it would be good for the listeners just to maybe tell us about your kind of origin story. What was your background, as we kind of mentioned at the start, you're from Thurso, so go right back to the start. Tell us.
I hear origin story and I think Marvel, I think Marvel comics. So my origin story, I grew up in a place called Thurso, which is the most northerly town in Britain, right up there by John O'Groats, 20 miles west of John O'Groats. Things weren't looking great, I suppose, my outlook. I was famously told by an English teacher of mine that the only place I was going to end up, in fact it was the only place you were going to end up, Robertson, is prison, which was understandable. I'd been at the children's panel 3 times. My folks split up when I was very young. Dad was an alcoholic, an abusive alcoholic. I have repaired that relationship, by the way. It's in a good state now, but our early years were tough ones. I left school at 15. I was working in a factory. By the age of 16, I was on the YTS, which was the youth training scheme. I was getting £29.50 a week for a 40-hour working week. And I quickly realised that having left school at 15, although I had money in my pocket, I had grossly underestimated what I thought I needed for my life, and I probably wanted to go back and educate myself. I was a surfer at the time. I was
a lot of surfing in that part of the world.
A lot of surfing up there. Well, Thurso is a world-class surfing break.
You learn something every
It's
podcast.
one of the top 100 waves in the world. Yeah, so it's a beautiful right-hand reef break.
That's interesting.
They've had, ASP World Professional contests up there. So I was lucky. Surfing saved me. When I was about 13, I got into surfing, and that was the beginning of the end of my criminal life, if you like, my early years of vandalism. Short-lived, luckily. And I got into the Scottish team, and so by the age of 16, I was Scottish junior champion.
Amazing.
In surfing. So I thought surfing was going to be my saviour.
Yeah.
And so I went down to Cornwall at the age of 17 and worked. I spent summers working in hotels. I worked in Burger King. I used to work through the night so I could surf in the day. But when I was down there, it was such an eye-opener. I met loads of people from other places, whereas obviously growing up in Thurso, I didn't meet anybody. But down in Cornwall, I met Australians and loads of different English people that are from Manchester, and it was a culture shock, but I also met people who were educated, and I was like, shit, I need to educate myself. So at the end of that summer season, I went back up to Thurso, and I thought, right, careers office. So I went in the careers office, and there was a bunch of leaflets from A all the way down to Z, from A acrobat down to, xylophone player. Zoology. And I got to P for performing.
That'd be an X.
I was at Z trying to think, a zebra trainer? I don't know. But anyway, I got to P for performing arts, and I'd also been into breakdancing when I was a kid. So
Thurso renowned for surfing and his breakdancing.
So I had through the breakdancing, I suppose I'd performed a wee bit, and I got to performing arts, and I thought I could do that.
Yeah.
Having never been in a theatre and never read a play, I just had obviously the kind of arrogance, just enough arrogance to go, I could give that a shot. So I went back into my high school, and I found you need one good teacher in your life, and there was a woman called Mrs. Omond, who, without which I wouldn't be here now. She was an amazing teacher, and I spoke to her and I said, look, I want to be an actor. And she took me under her wing, gave me some plays to read, put me in touch with a local amateur dramatics woman, and they trained me, gave me some audition work, and I went and auditioned for Dundee Theatre Arts, and I did a year there. And in that year, how they accepted me, I think they were short on boys. And I was also very enthusiastic, and enthusiasm will get you a long way in life.
I agree.
So I got into that, and I did a year in Dundee Theatre Arts, and I made up for a lifetime of misspent education. So I milked it dry. I was the first person in the class in the morning, I was the last person to leave. We had free entry to Dundee Rep Theatre to watch plays. I'd go and watch the same play 7 or 8 times. So I really immersed myself. I was reading about 8 to 10 plays a week.
Wow.
I absolutely
just gave it absolutely everything.
Everything I had, I gave. And then at the end of that year, I was like, that's it. This is what I want to do, which was kind of the object. I thought I'll do a year's theatre arts, and by the end of it, I'll know if it's for me or if it's just a pipe dream. By the end of it, I knew I had an aptitude for it, and I wanted to give it a shot, and I had a passion for it. So I auditioned I could only afford to audition for 3 schools. It was like 30, 40 quid a time. So I auditioned for what was RSAMD at the time, the Royal Conservatoire now, East 15 Acting School in London and Drama Centre London. And I got accepted to both London schools. In the Glasgow school, I don't know, maybe I wasn't Scottish enough, but they didn't,
For your tutor.
They wanted American students, and I don't know. But anyway, I didn't get in there. And so I went to London, and the next issue I had to overcome was the fact that I had no money. The people that were going to these schools either had rich parents who could afford to pay for them, or they'd managed to get bursaries. And as we were approaching the start of that first term, I still had no money, and I'd written about 400 letters, to anyone, rich individuals, organisations, the Scottish office, my local authority, and I had begged. I said, look, there was out of 500 applicants, I got one of the 30 spaces in that college. And Drama Centre London trained people like Pierce Brosnan, Anthony Hopkins, Sean Connery was trained by the principals. Colin Firth, Helen McCrory, Tom Hardy, Michael Fassbender, Paul Bettany. These are all people who went to Drama Centre London, so it was a prestigious school. And I wanted to get in. So I wrote to all these people and said, look, I'm from the north coast of Scotland. I've been accepted to this prestigious school, but it's looking like I might not be able to train if I don't get funding. Please, will you help? And most of it was no's. And then, but 3 days before the start of term, the principal phoned me. And the principal said, how are you getting on with your research? And I said, look, I laid out what I had done. And he said, well, we're going to let you start anyway, with no funding.
Amazing that you gave the opportunity.
And I was just like, thank God. So I was sleeping on a floor in Bethnal Green on the East End of London for the first term, first couple of terms, and I was jumping the tube to work every day. And the curriculum at Drama Centre was 9 to 9 every day, 5 days a week, and you'd have to come in at weekends to rehearse projects as well. So it was 12-hour days every day. It was brutal. They called it
very intense
conservatoire style training. So it was really hardcore, and I was emaciated because I wasn't eating. And so the principal took me up to his office one day and he said, Adam, what are you doing for food? And I said, well, I'm just I'm eating from the supermarket and stuff like that. He says, are you getting a hot meal? And I was like, no. And he said, right, let me speak to a friend. And an ex-student of his was Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah.
And so Anthony Hopkins bought me lunch for a year. And when he came to Drama Centre, I got to thank him. He came and he gave a big speech and he was talking about his career and Silence of the Lambs and everything. And I got to meet him and I said, hey, you're the guy, I'm the one that you're buying lunch for.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks for putting a bit of meat in my bones. And he went, oh, come here, boy. And he gave me, he's a big, strong, powerful Welshman, and he nearly broke my back. He had a big bear hug on it. So Anthony Hopkins paid my lunches for the first year, but also while I was there was a documentary on TV about Drama Centre that had been filmed the year before we started, and so there was some interest in Drama Centre. It was a fly-on-the-wall type documentary, and a wealthy benefactor phoned the school to see if she could help any of the students. So I got in touch with her, wrote to her, and she paid my fees for the first year.
You see, when you were talking briefly about your journey actually about coming to the arts, and you maybe felt that in school, it took you beyond school and to go out into the world and experience a different setup to maybe decide that you wanted to get yourself educated. Why was it that you feel as if you never made that step in school? Was it just...
God, because in school my life was chaos. You know, it was just about survival. You know, we were living in a caravan, you know, for some of it, or in council flats. My mum she had a job. She was bringing up me and my little brother on my own. You know, my dad would make occasional appearances, but it was chaos, you know. So my trouble, you know, without being overly psychoanalytical about it, was all about playing up, playing out, you know, and trying to get attention. You know, working hard at school wasn't, you know, and plus, back then, I hope things are a bit different now, but back then there was also, I think, a culture of bad teaching. You know, there was you either survived or you didn't. There was none of like today we accept that there's different styles of learning, visual learners, audio learners, kinesthetic learners. And there's different modes and attention, and we even talk about mental health.
They understand that each student is different rather than, you know,
in my day it was like forget him, you know. So I'd have teachers who would just let me go and bunk off. And I was, fair enough, by this time I was into my surfing, but I wrote a story once from the top of the history block where I could have a view down through the town to the coast, and I was watching the surf coming in. And I wrote a story, and it got printed in the UK surf magazine, Surf Scene at the time. And that was the first time one of my teachers went, "Adam, you've been published in a surf magazine." And I went, "Yeah, you know." And it was the first time one of my teachers kind of showed any interest in me at all. But when I was competing, and the teachers would let me off and just go, "Adam, go and surf." You know, there was
crazy. It's a different time.
It was a different time. And so education, I understood the value of it once I left, but I didn't understand the value of it when I was in it.
Interesting perspective. And you feel as if, you know, I was at a prestigious school to go into, and you've already talked a little about the alumni that come from that kind of organisation. Coming from such a northerly part of Scotland, did you feel like not a fish out of water, but just different?
Totally fish out of water. I mean, I was navigating the tube. You know, I had never seen that people, you know, that amount of people in my life. I came from a town where the population is 10,000. Almost everybody knows everybody. And there I was in one of the biggest cities in the world, you know, and I remember as a culture shock, my first week, I was staying in Bethnal Green in the East End of London, and the college was in Chalk Farm, which is Camden Town in the north. So you Central Line, Northern Line. So that's the red line and the black line for anyone who's familiar with the tube map. And the change was at Bank Station. A Bank Station is a warren, like a rabbit warren. So 9 o'clock at night, well, it must have been 10 o'clock by this time, I'm navigating the underground passages. I get all the way down to the Central Line, it's cancelled. And I'm like, God, I don't know how to navigate my way here. If I knew that tube took me to Bethnal Green, but to go up and go on buses and find my way to the East End. But that was before Google Maps, before you could open up a phone and just find out where you're at, you know. It had an A to Z, and I was leafing through. But anyway, on the way back, everybody that I encountered that was heading down the Central Line, because there was no tannoy announcement, I spoke to and I went, "Hey guys, the train's cancelled." Everyone ignored me. Everyone thought I was going to steal their handbag, you know what I mean? And I was just like, I was used to speaking from Scotland, I was used to speaking to everybody. And every single person I spoke to try and help, ignored me. And that was one of the big culture shocks when I was in London, you know, like, and I'd get onto a busy tube and there'd be spare seats, but nobody would move, and I'd be like, "Hey guys,
do you think London's still like that though? Do you think London's still like that comparatively to Scotland?
I think comparatively it is. It's still not as, and people comment on that. Like when all my English friends, London pals come up for a weekend, they come to stay, they're always like, "God, everyone just talks to you," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's Glasgow, that's Scotland, you know. People acknowledge you.
People make Glasgow.
People make Glasgow. Sometimes they'll not leave you alone. Sometimes you gotta get them to shut up." But
so anyway, you got to your second year.
So I got through, the other fascinating part of that story was, so I got through my first year, but the woman who paid for my first year had said right at the beginning, "I can't pay for all 3 years, but, you know, I'm going to get you through your first year." And I'm like, brilliant. So towards the end of that first year, I'm looking at second and third year being cancelled because I can't afford to pay for it. Now, like when I was in Dundee, I milked everything dry. See, if there was a free ticket, I took it. One night, there was a free ticket printed up on pinned up on the notice board in the canteen for a theatre show in Islington, and I took it, went, you know, and I finished early, went to the theatre. I'm sat there in the theatre on my own waiting for the show to start, and there's a spare seat, and the woman next to me says, "And would you make way for Richard, please?" And I was like, oh, no bother, I don't know who Richard
No
is,
bother.
but, you know. And this guy sits, and I recognise his voice, and you'll be too young to remember, to recognise this voice, but the voice was, I don't believe it. It was from a show called One Foot in the Grave.
I think my dad maybe watched that.
Victor Meldrew was the character he played. And anyway, I get chatting to him, we have a great chat. I discover that he's from Scotland, he's from Greenock, and I explained that I was, down my first year of training. We had a great chat. At the end of the night, I said, lovely to meet you, Richard. I walked away, and he went, Adam, and I said, yeah. And he said, look, see if you have any trouble with your funding for next year, you get in touch with me. And I was like...
Funny you say that.
I was stunned, and I went, oh, thank you very much. And I stumbled out of the theatre going, I think he offered to help me. I wasn't sure. So the next day, I found out who his agent was. He didn't give me his number, but when you're that famous, you
can find him, yeah.
So I wrote a postcard to his agent saying, hi, Richard, it was lovely to meet you last night. I hope that I don't need to take that kind offer of help, but, because I was writing all these letters, and I was kind of felt confident that having got through 1 year, like my local authority will help me now. I've survived.
You've got a bit of a buy-in.
But it turns out nobody did help, and that summer I was back down working in Cornwall again, and I wrote to Richard, and maybe 3 months have passed this time, so I'm worried he's not even going to remember me. And I wrote to him, I said, hi, you might not remember me, name's Adam, we met in the theatre. His manager phoned me, but 3 days later and said, hi, Richard would like to pay your fees for the next 2 years and give you a bit of money to survive as well. And so without him, I wouldn't be here.
I think it changed the course.
It changed the course of my life, and to have somebody believe in you, and he would come to the shows, he'd come and watch my end of term shows and stuff, and so I was, and that's why, so we'll maybe talk a bit about the screen acting course that I'm running. I've offered a free place, and for every course I run, I'll always have a free place in there for somebody, because
the legacy that you're given.
It's just a way, I was gifted something, and without his help, I wouldn't be here, and I certainly wouldn't have had that training, which was invaluable for me. So it's just a way of kind of paying it forward, but I was very lucky.
The circle of goodwill.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you got to the end of 3 years?
So I got to the end of my 3 years training. I graduated in 1996, and as a lot of other young actors, I was waiting tables, bar work, I was painting and decorating, did a bit of landscape gardening, I had the odd acting job. My first professional acting job was in Casualty, which was, I don't even know if Casualty's still running now.
I think it is.
It's
like one of those things that you see, but you're like, I'm
the
not going to watch
hospital
it.
drama, I just don't know if it's still going. But anyway, so that was my first TV job.
How did you get that? So tell us, so for the people that are viewing this and maybe not so afraid with like what that process might look like, even now or then, would you literally go and audition with?
So I had to go and audition. Yeah, I had to go and audition. I had an agent. I was lucky enough to graduate from college with an agent. I managed to get an agent interested in me and signed me up before I left.
Does that happen to most people coming out of those colleges?
No, I mean, nowadays it's a lot more difficult. They're still the same process. Agents have, the graduates will have a graduate showcase. So most colleges will have a graduate showcase, and all the agents and casting directors will be invited along. And often they go along, but it's more competitive now. And so some people will get signed up from graduation, others will have to enter the profession, do student films or short films, or just do a load of free work, try and build up a profile, build up a show reel, and use that to get an agent. And it's craft. So I was lucky enough to get an agent. My agent put me up for things, and I got that first job, and it was like 4 lines or something. It was a small part, but it was a foot in.
But it was on the once it's on your CV.
Yeah, you've got professional credit, and it's just the more professional credits you get, people start going, oh, well, he can do the job. And then maybe within the first kind of year and a half, or 2 years actually, within the first 2 years, I got a decent role in Taggart, of all things.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which was Taggart the movie. It was cast in London.
There's a Taggart movie?
We did a Taggart movie. It was a TV movie, but it was 2 hours, and it was written by Raymond Chandler, who was the original creator of Taggart, so it was a good one, And fascinatingly, I was playing an English public school boy in it. Now, that was the antithesis of what I had experienced. So I went up to Harrow, and I did some research up in Harrow. I phoned up Harrow, I spoke to the principal, I said, look, I'm doing Taggart.
It's a very upmarket English private school.
It's a private school.
Very, very
Harrow, I mean, Winston Churchill went there.
Yeah.
I think Churchill went to Harrow. But yeah, Harrow and Eton are kind of twins.
Synonymous with the kind of the English public school boys. But yeah, anyway, continue.
So
you
did that,
to do your
went and
research.
did Taggart, came up here. That was my first job back in Scotland. And then I did a few plays up here for the Traverse and the Lyceum. And so I just slowly started building up my career. But at the same time, I was always, as I was talking to you, I did a sales job. I had my first child I had young, 2 years at a drama centre. I had my first son. And so that put things into sharp focus for me, in that while my friends who I graduated with could just be single actors and maybe be on the dole, I had to have a job. So I was working sales 40, 50 hours a week, as well as trying to audition and keep my acting alive. And so I've managed to do that over the years, and I've produced and directed stuff, and as I say to all my students now, if you want a career in the creative sector, you've got to have a creative approach to paying your bills. So whether it's directing, writing, producing, having your own business on the side, that's what you need to do,
Yeah, it's funny because I went to, my degree is in commercial music, and one of the things that they teach us, and I don't know if they taught you back then, is they say that regardless of what you come out of this with, whether you're doing music or not, particularly if you are going into the creative arts, you need to have a portfolio career, essentially. So you need to have multiple income streams, because unless you're really at the top, then it's very hard to demonstrate, a continuous stream of revenue from one thing, because, you see more and more of it now, and partially that, I guess it's been very poignant in the last 18 months without live shows, but for music, with the rise of streaming, you find out people that are in bands that you would consider to be like quite successful and like leading bands in some scenes, and when they're not on tour, they're working in bars, they're working in restaurants.
Absolutely.
And it just shows you that you really, unless you're in that 1%, you've got to support yourself, and you've got to find ways to support yourself.
And if you love it, you will. If you love it, you'll find a way.
That's why I started.
Yeah, and you've got to, but it's a trade-off between security and opportunity, And so I've got friends.
It's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
I've got friends who have got proper jobs, the engineers, accountants, tradies, whatever, and they go to me, I don't know how you do how can you do that? You've no paid holidays, you've got no security, you don't know where your next paycheck. And I go, well, I have done that, because when I was in London, I worked in Soho for a while. I worked for an internet company, I worked for a sales company. For a while, I had a proper job, and I had, and I found that difficult, and I found it really stifling. So for my mental health, I suppose, and well-being, I had to find a way of balancing it, and the only way I could do that is to generate my own business and to be my own boss, essentially. So pretty
much, the entrepreneurial way of kind of almost looking at it.
I had to, I had to do well. I've got bills to pay, and the best way of paying those bills and having control, so that if an acting job comes up, you can go and do your acting job instead of trying to ask a boss.
You need that flexibility.
I need the flexibility. I need to be my own boss. So
how did you go about doing that in terms of taking that to the next level?
My first company was, I worked at Borough Market in London, which is
a big food market.
Huge
big
food market. My stepdad
used to have a fish stall there back in the day, because his background is a fishmonger, and he used to supply hotels in London. He'd always
What was his business?
We've been George Cameron Sons is what it is up here, and they supply 95% of hotels and restaurants. But back in the day, he used to be at the London fish markets. And funnily enough, he used to have a shop in Scrabster, which I know is really far north as well.
Wow.
It's quite like a...
Scrabster's the place. There's a great restaurant there now called Captain's Cabin. It's the sixth most sustainable restaurant in the world.
Wow. How did they even try that?
How
did they even work that out?
I don't know, it was in The Guardian. The guy, the chef, it's a husband and wife team. He's got a few boats that he uses, and he picks the menu that day. So he goes to the harbour, which is outside his front door, gets the fish that have just been landed, and then he makes a menu. And so
that is amazing.
I suppose it's the only way it could be more if it was his own, if he went out and caught the fish, but it's literally 1 degree.
It's like one step back in the supply chain. Literally, you always hear these things about how many miles it is to create your pizza, but you're like, it's...
Well, his is walking distance, I suppose. It's coming from the sea. In fact, the harbour's probably where the coffee machine is, and this is where his restaurant is.
So just to kind of clarify the timeline, so you finished up in 1996, Casualty...
Casualty...
And then when are you at the
few different jobs. I was doing sales. I worked for London Electricity. I was doing door-to-door sales.
How was that?
That was
as an actor?
Brutal, but good fun and an amazing learning experience.
Think it made you a better actor?
Maybe. I mean, people say that, is it all about acting? I think what the audience are getting rowdy, they're going to start throwing things at us.
Relax, guys, I know it's good.
I think what I learned from my door-to-door sales was about acting is often mistakenly thought of as putting on, like put on an accent, put on a character. Okay. And The best acting is more about revealing. It's more about taking stuff off.
Love that.
And with sales, if you're going to make a connection with someone, you've got to be real and authentic, you know? And
People can smell the bullshit.
Yeah. So I would connect with people. As soon as they opened the door, I would, it'd be a case of looking in the eye. How you doing? Look, I'm here for London Electricity. I've got something to sell you. If you've not got the time, I totally understand. And it was just, and I ended up being very good at it.
You build a team?
I built a team. I had, at one stage, I was managing an area in southeast London, Brixton area. I had 126 people underneath me at the age of, 24 at the time. So, flash forward, so I did that. Then I ended up working for an internet company, and I was a sales manager for that internet company. And then I found that stifling. I think what ended up happening is I got an acting job, and that's when I realised the whole employer-employee thing.
The relationship just wasn't going to happen.
It was difficult, because I was beholden to people in the hierarchy, in the chain. And so I resigned from that company, and I ended up working at Borough Market, selling organic bread. And the guy that I was working for eventually asked me to take over part of his business, so I did. So I bought a van, I hired a bunch of actor pals, and I started doing farmers markets for him. And it was brilliant because I was employing loads of actors who were pals, giving them the job. I was more in control, so if acting stuff came up, I was able to go and do it. It was well paid. I managed to just control things. So I had that company for a few years. Then me and my new partner, I split up with my first partner. We started our own business called The Veggie Table, which was a vegetarian food business in Borough Market. And that eventually grew into a cafe, restaurant, and so we ran that for a few years.
But people always say that, when you're running your own business, you're an entrepreneur, it's can be so time consuming. So I suppose it does give you that, but when you're talking about growing a business, like you're kind of talking about with the Veggie Table, is that not then, when you do need that flexibility, I suppose if you've got two people involved, it does give you a bit of something, but was that not quite a lot to juggle as well?
It was masses. I feel like I've juggled my whole life, my whole life is just juggle, whether it's kids, acting, surfing, trying to keep myself, my soul fed, because if you don't fill your soul, you've got no resources to deal with the crises that life
consume to create.
Yeah, you've got to be able to just be able to juggle, because if I wasn't able to do that and spin those plates, I'd be, God knows where I'd be, but I wouldn't be here.
Thurso maybe?
Maybe, I'd probably end up being back in Thurso, and I'd probably end up being relatively unfulfilled, and that's, touch wood, I've managed to survive. And what I tell my students now that I'm teaching is that, it's my love for this work and for storytelling, I suppose, is what I boil it down to. Acting is a sophisticated and elaborate form of storytelling. It dates way back to campfire storytelling.
It's like right back to the very start.
Primordial times, we have sat round campfires, and the guys, the drawings on caves, what are they about? Somebody was trying to tell a story. And what we've got now with Netflix and Prime and BritBox and all these streaming channels is an elaborate form of storytelling.
Well, it's interesting because I've read before, it's like, in terms of like the written words being used for storytelling, right? It's like, that's been around for like 5,600 years. Let's say, for example, you're talking about like hieroglyphics in Egypt. But prior to that, the way that generations and communities of people across the world would pass on information through generation is purely through words. Yeah, through this oral and stories. And they say, it's a bit of a tangent, but interestingly enough, like 12,000 years ago, there was a massive flood in the world, right? About 12,000 years ago, it was the Younger Dryas event. There was a big meteor that hit Greenland and sea levels rise, right? And they say that the story of Noah's Ark in the Bible comes down from when they saw these big floods coming. And obviously, because the Bible came, that story in the Bible was before Christ, but it came like 8,000 years after that. But they say one of the reasons that's in the Bible is because they had this story that had been passed down by the generations, because it was seen, like back then, those events were like described as kind of biblical.
That makes sense.
It's quite interesting, though, when you think about what you're saying in terms of...
It makes more sense than a guy building a boat and putting two of each animal in it, Yeah.
But anyway, so in terms of that, what about when you managed to kind of... So yeah, as I mentioned briefly in the start, you run River City for 4 years.
Yeah.
And then you've also, because just with the timelines of that, with the film, because you spent 6 years writing your own film, Third Star, is that right?
That's right. So I didn't write it. No, my business partner Vaughan Savell wrote the film, but I partnered him in setting up the company Western Edge Pictures, and we developed the story. We had like 20 drafts of the script. And I invested 6 years of my life in making that. Most people, filmmaking
it feels like it's a long time.
Is a brutal endeavour. You know,
True labour of love.
someone once likened filmmaking to a one-armed man building a chicken coop in a hurricane. Yeah, it's that brutal. You know, I know people that are they've been carrying a script around for 15 years and they're still trying to get it made. So 6 years was brilliant for a first film.
Yeah.
But we went through our first director, that failed, and we packaged the film. We had for a while, we had Benedict Cumberbatch and Tom Hardy attached to this film. And then Tom Hardy ended up doing Inception with Christopher Nolan.
Yeah.
Which is understandable. I mean, you know, I would have
really
loved
judge
him
him
to
for
do
that.
the low-budget British independent film or the Hollywood,
Hollywood
epic.
blockbuster,
So
yeah.
he took the Hollywood blockbuster. So that was Third Star. So that was an amazing part of my life.
When did that start? And
We started developing that in 2004. We eventually got a wee bit of seed capital to develop the film from Film Agency Wales, because we were filming it in Wales and Pembrokeshire and the coast. That helped us package the rest of the film, raise some finance, and so we started shooting that in 2009. And the film was released in 2010. It was the closing night gala film at the Edinburgh Film Festival, which was an amazing experience to have your film, red carpet, 600 seats.
Where do you rate that in terms of your...
It's one of the highlights of my life.
Yeah.
It was an amazing experience, that whole journey. Lots of people make a film and they either don't manage to get it seen by anybody, or they don't manage to sell it, or it just disappears into obscurity. And this film, on that opening night in a cinema with 600 seats in it, had Tilda Swinton was there watching the film, Brian Cox was there, you know, Timothy Spall, David Thewlis, Robbie Carlyle. There was just all these people in watching our film, you know, and I remember sitting at the back of the theatre watching it. You know, we were up on stage introducing the film and stuff like that. I just thought, this is amazing. All these people are sat here watching.
There's all the days doing door-to-door sales that feel worth it in that moment.
It felt worth it in that moment.
Yeah.
You know, it was a beautiful moment in time. Yeah. So that was that. So Third Star was great, and then it opened at Leicester Square in London, and I don't know, about 40 cinemas around the UK. It opened about 50 cinemas in America, and it still has a life. It's got a cult following, Third Star, because of Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah. He's a big name to be attached to.
He's got fans.
And his star, obviously, since then has it's grown massively.
That was his first lead role, I think. You might know. I think it was. It was his first lead role in a feature film. He'd had lead roles in telly stuff, but this was his first lead role in a feature film, and he went straight from Third Star to Sherlock.
Really?
That was his next job.
There you go. Look, you're giving people springboards, and people can get that springboard from your classes.
You never know, exactly.
So, just so we can get the timelines right. So at this point, you're running your own businesses with the other half in London. You're involved in producing this film, and then 2011, you're into River City.
So 2011, I get River City. So that means I'm commuting then. So we were living in South Wales at the time, although we still had our London business. I was living my life in a triangle, you know. Mumbles in South Wales, Glasgow, London.
It's not exhausting.
It was exhausting, man, you know, and it was a lot of miles travelling.
Were you driving them, training them?
A plane or train, yeah. I had flights built into my contract so I could go home, and it was sustainable for a while, but I was also falling in love with Glasgow at the time, and I was loving being back up in Scotland, having been 15 years down in London, and then by that time...
Were you back much in that time at all? Were you kind of...
I'd always come back, because my folks are still in Thurso, so I was still going back to Thurso, but I had never spent... And I'd done a few plays in Edinburgh and what have you, and done some tours of Scotland with plays, so I had been back, but I hadn't had any sustained periods like I did when I started in River City, and I was based in Glasgow. And I just loved the crack, I loved the Glaswegian humour, I loved the people and the environment, and I started to imagine just living back up here. And so by 2014, by which the other big factor, I suppose, in my decision to move back up was that the independence referendum had kicked in.
Yeah.
And I was heavily involved in that, because I was on telly by then. I was being roped into opening Yes shops and campaigning and stuff like that. So I was like, wow, this is going to be...
You really feel like a big part of something?
Felt a big part of something. I thought, here we are, we're on the cusp.
Surge of national pride.
Yeah, well, I was never a nationalist, though. I was never a flag waver. You know, what hooked me about independence at that time was the idea of a kind of socially democratic European nation state, you know, a small country like Denmark, Norway, Finland, Sweden, that fend for themselves, that, you know, have a relatively small footprint, whose I learned a lot at the time. In Norway, no old people died last year because they couldn't put their heating on. Whereas old people are dying here because they can't. People who fought in the war are dying because the heating allowance they get isn't enough, and they've got to, ask themselves whether they can
Massive
heat or
social problems in this country with stuff like that.
And so I thought independence for me was more about like a small unit managing itself better than a big unit. That was pretty much what it was about, and I got heavily invested in that.
It makes sense because they always have the quality of life index things, and it's always the Scandinavian nations that are right at the top of that.
And I'm not saying it'd be hard for us, we'd struggle, but we would get there in the end, and our problems would be our problems to fix as opposed to somebody else's, which is how I kind of viewed the whole Westminster, the shackled to Westminster thing.
Better not go too much into politics.
I wear my heart on my sleeve.
I'm saying that slightly tongue in cheek, to be fair.
But it was a big factor in me deciding to move up here, and I didn't have to convince my family. My wife at the time, she was English, but she had been up many times and fallen in love with Scotland, and so she was totally up for moving. And we had 2 kids at that time, so we sold the cafe. Well, we had to run it remotely for a while, but we sold the restaurant in Wales, and we moved up to Glasgow in 2014.
I don't know how you're spinning all. You're 100%. You got a cafe.
Yeah, got a cafe,
a restaurant. 2 kids, a wife.
2 kids. I mean, I've got 4 kids, obviously 2 to my first and 2 to my recent ex. So we moved up 2014, settled, and I've been living on the south side now since then, and I love it. I'm
in the same boat as you because I live on the south side myself, and I've got to say, it is an amazing place. And you see so many good young Glasgow creatives as well. Yeah, they're involved in the area. It is thriving, and it's on the up and up. And obviously, part of the community here at Box Hub is about the creative people that we can all bring in, and that kind of Glasgow community network. You find since you've come back, in terms of you've been able to get involved more and more in the kind of the local community. Because is that what because one of the things that I found so interesting when we were discussing about what we would talk about in terms of giving back to the community is the stuff that you've done with the Scottish prison system in Barlinnie. I'm really keen to talk to you about that, and I know that you've kind of touched on the social responsibility aspect in terms of the Scandinavian countries, but that is something that I think is really interesting in terms of using the arts as a methodology for social change and prison reform. Change.
Well, I started working for Street Cones.
So tell us,
I moved up 2014. I was obviously still in Riverside. I finished Riverside in 2015, and I started working for Street Cones in 2016. And I was just moved by what they were doing. They'd started by an inmate in Barlinnie prison who'd done a programme with the Citizens Theatre, and it was his first brush with the arts and with theatre, and it had a massive impact on him, and so he started this enterprise, Street Cones. I got in touch with him, started working with him, and before long I was kind of designing programmes and running workshops myself, and I was using my experience of being in the children's panel 3 times.
That's what I was going to say.
I was almost in a home, I was almost sent to a home a couple of times, and so I always, with the young offenders that I started working with, it was there but for the grace of God go I. These are people that were in my boat, I was in their boat. I was
going to say, do you feel as if, based on the experience that you had growing up, do you feel as if, you said it was surfing at the time, but do you think that your experience of having the arts give you a purpose and take you away from what your life could have been, inspired you when you came back to help those other people have a bit of a paradigm shift and see?
Yes.
Do you think that's what kind of hooked you?
That's what motivated me, and I started discovering that the buzz I got from acting, what I loved about acting was it was storytelling, and I love storytelling, whether it's a guy in the pub or somebody I'm chatting to at a bus stop or a story. The storytelling is what moves, that keeps the world, moving for me, and it keeps me inspired. And so I was moved by the possibility offered by Street Cones to allow people like me that didn't have access to creative spaces to be welcomed in and find the gift of storytelling. So when we were working in, my first programme was a 12-week programme in Shotts, which is a high-tariff prison. You're dealing with people who are in for life. And I had 8-10 people in a workshop environment. We start with a blank page. These guys have never read a play, most of them, never been to the theatre, and I start doing creative games with them, creative exercises, and we get them writing a script. And then by the end of that, there's a 60-page story that they've written, they've built and crafted and scrutinised, and then we perform that to the prison population, and then their friends and family come and see it, and it's the ripple effect of that on the individual who's helped craft it, but also the people that watch it. And that's the power of storytelling, you know. It's so I found that I got really passionate about that, and so I'm still working with street cones. I've got, even since COVID, we do about 2 or 3 workshops a week online with people who are on community payback orders. I've made a few films, written and directed a couple of films for them, and been able to use lived experience actors, so people who
see with that stuff. You know, is there any kind of particular? I mean, because again, I do find it really interesting. Like, it's really fascinating, and you know, I would never claim to be from any kind of disprivileged childhood, but I also came from a broken home, and growing up, we discussed this, like when we were having a couple of games of table tennis before, it was music, which was the creative outlet for me that gave me something to pour my passion into, and maybe to help explain the things that you couldn't do it so well. So I think what I was kind of going to come back to was, were there any stories from your time involved in that, any like characters you came across that were involved in plays that particularly resonated with you? I feel like I'm putting you on the spot a bit, but it's just to kind of, you talked about the lived experience kind of actors in terms of, we can like move on to that, or maybe that's a good way to actually move on to that.
Well, there's an actor. I mean, there's loads of different stories. You know, obviously there's kind of sensitivity around revealing the individuals involved. But for example, we'll say there was a guy called Gary who was, you know, I suppose you'd say a classic inmate, big, burly, bald-headed. You know, he almost had a kind of Bronson tash, you know, and we were like, this is going to be fascinating to see what he brings to the table, you know. And we ended up telling a story about, it was kind of like a One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest kind of setting about inmates who it was set in the future, and it was flashing back to, because one of the problems in jails now, and then when we were doing it, was what's called legal highs. NSP, use psychoactive substances, and the reason that's rife is because it doesn't show up in the prisoners' dip tests that they do, but it is lethal because you just never know, you know, what you're going to get and what end. I've never
seen a documentary about that, Spice in Manchester.
Spice,
and it's like turns people like,
it's
like
brutal.
The synthetic cannabinoids, and it turns people like literally like insane. Like, it's crazy. We've seen the effects of that. If you've not seen anything like that, Google it, because that stuff is seriously like mind altering. So I can totally, having seen the effects of that, I could.
So that's what the play was about, and it was flashing forward to these people that had ended up in some kind of, I suppose, like asylum through their use of legal highs. And one of the guys, Gary, was this big guy, and he ended up playing a character who was burly and kind of grotesque and bigoted, but we discovered that was merely a front for his own homosexuality. And that was a brave thing for him to do in a prison, because he was a heterosexual man, but it was a really brave thing for him to do. But through the storytelling and through the understanding of what the narrative was and the core message was, he understood that we needed that character, the function that character played was about not judging a book by its cover and looking deeper at what motivates certain people's behaviour. And so it was a whole investigation about why this character was the way he is. And the character, his dad was in the military, and his dad was brutal towards him, and so he was never allowed to discover who he truly was. And so he had developed this facade of just being this brutal, racist, bigoted kind of guy. And inside, he turns out he wanted to be a dancer, you know, and it was a beautiful thing to see.
That's amazing. But that's just such a beautiful. This is kind of what I was keen to get you to kind of get that example. It's just a beautiful example of the arts allowing someone to get in touch with who they really are and finding a higher sense of purpose, even though they've potentially been misled through life. Yes. And that's why I think that's such a powerful kind of thing to do. And I know that you know moved on to kind of saying that you have the work you've been doing lately in terms of the production side has been doing these lived. How would you describe it?
Lived experience people. So, like, you know, there's another. And so in the film that you mentioned in the intro, Something to Lose, which was actually a couple of years ago, I've done another one since then. But the lead actor in that film is a guy called James Gregg, who is now an actor, but had done, I think, 1 or 2 stints in Berlin, and has since come out, worked with us. He's the lead actor in the story, and he does a brilliant job. And it's essentially kind of biographical a wee bit, in that it follows this guy Tam and his kind of day in the life of someone who has dodged the bullet of a custodial sentence and ended up in a community payback order. And he hates it, but he realises soon that it was actually a lifeline because he's able to keep his tenancy, he's able to maintain his relationship and look after his son. So it was this, and he's since gone on to do a few short films. I believe he got a part, there's an STV Channel 4 production at the moment called Screws, which they're filming here in Glasgow, set in a jail, and so I think he's got himself a part in that as well. So that's an amazing story. There's a guy who was, in jail and probably didn't have a great deal of prospects, but through the arts has found a lifeline for him, and now he's forging ahead, making a career in it. So
it's transformational. Like, it absolutely
it's a
is.
big deal.
And are you kind of keen to do more of this kind of stuff going forward? Because I appreciate in the last 18 months, like I'm sure everyone's sick of talking about COVID, and we had Danny on the podcast previously, and he talked about how his business went from strength to strength. But do you feel that the sort of people that you would be interacting with and the arts giving people a lifeline, do you think that given everything that's going on, people like that have maybe had the opportunity taken away from them somewhat?
A wee bit. I think it's been really hard for people in jails. I mean, jail is an isolating place by its
I've never been
nature.
to one, so I guess you've got a...
So during COVID, it was even more so because they weren't allowed visits. They've obviously got no internet access, so they've got no, other than phone calls. It must have been a really difficult time. We weren't allowed to go in and work with them. We tried to get one project off the ground, but it just proved... Prison's fraught with difficulty procedurally. It's just fraught with difficulty trying to get anything.
Bureaucratic.
It's very, very tricky. But what we have managed to do, which is not the same as the work we'd love to keep doing in prisons, but is we're working with 13 local authorities across Scotland, and we're running what we call Road to Change workshops. So they're online. It's essentially what we were doing in jail, but online. So you'll have people who are on community payback orders. They can spend some of their hours coming into a workshop with us. It's led by 2 facilitators, and we start with a blank page, do some improv, some creative games, get them engaging in story and narrative, and we build a script. And then we read that story. When it's finished, we'll read it to caseworkers and invited audience, and we film it, obviously online it's filmed, and then it's released as a live stream, and people can kind of comment and feedback. So that's happening right now, and it's happened all through COVID. So it's
amazing you've managed to keep that going. See when you're in the prisons initially, like pre-COVID, when you were talking about that, you just popped in my head when you were saying that there, because you were saying that you start with a blank page. You talked about Gary and the journey that he went through. So when you're actually starting with a blank page and you're working with a set of prisoners, some of whom are doing, from what I can understand, exceptionally long custodial sentences. You're actually getting to the point of taking it from a blank canvas to performing that play in terms of all the people involved in it as well. Yeah. It goes all the way to performance kind of level. Yeah.
Well, with the plays in prison, it was full on that. We had costumes and we had music and we had little bits of set. Obviously, you can't be too elaborate because there's restrictions and the kind of stuff you can actually get in. But we've had pretty medium-sized productions in jail.
It's quite a surreal thought.
It is. One of the last ones we did, we almost had what I refer to as a Johnny Cash moment.
I was thinking, the first thing that I thought of was Johnny Cash when you were talking about in prison.
One of the cast was singing the Jeremy Cinnamon song, She's a Belter.
Yeah.
And in rehearsal, it was always just done with the cast. But once there was an audience, he obviously felt very adrenalised, and he decided to stand on his chair and start rousing the audience to get involved. So we've got a prison, the whole visit room full of, I think it was about just under 100 prisoners, security guards all the way around, and this guy's up in a chair going, "Come on, she's a belter!" And all these people are getting up and saying, and I could see at the background people on the security and I was going, "Oh man, it's going to kick off here." And I was like, "Right, who's the biggest guy? Who can I hide behind?" Luckily, it didn't go that far, but it was a good experience.
Amazing. I guess the last thing that I'm probably keen to get a bit of value about is kind of where we're headed now. We've been through your whole career, your upbringing, the challenge of the arts, and we've talked briefly a little bit about the workshops that you're doing now. But do you want to tell kind of me and us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so screen acting was something, despite having a training at one of the most prestigious schools, certainly in Britain, if not the world, Drama Centre London, I left, and like I said, my first job in Casualty, and then on Taggart, I still realised there was so much to learn, and I had on the Casualty job, what I call a rabbit in the headlights moment.
Yeah.
Even though I knew how to act, I knew how to develop a character, I knew how to work out what a scene's about, there was all these people, boom operators, wardrobe, makeup, art department, gaffers, sparkies, light, you know,
The whole world that you just didn't know how to
I
do
all these people, and it was like action, and it was an alienating experience, but I managed to get through it. All the way up to River City, where I'm ending up with doing thousands of hours in front of the camera, because if you don't know, River City's filmed at 2 crews at any one time. So as an actor, you can be involved in 4 storylines in a day. So in terms of learning and the process, it's rapid.
I get we're used to that spinning plates.
It was a plate spinner in total, but I learned so much. And then obviously I'd had my experience already with Third Star. I've done a couple of films since. Obviously I did Outlander. I had a wee bit on a big American film with Michael Keaton, American Assassin.
Yeah.
And so I had developed, they say to be a pilot you need 10,000 hours.
Well, so I was thinking about, because there was the study that was done in the 90s, and it was like to become an absolute master of your craft in anything, whether that's like the violin or the piano, I think it's like the 10,000 hour rule.
Yes.
It's the rule of 10,000 hours, and I was kind of half thinking, when you're talking about how many hours
I haven't actually mapped it out yet, but I've got to have done at least 10,000 hours, right? Okay. And so I started probably about 5-6 years ago doing the odd bit of acting for camera training for like Langside College, City College, RCS, etc. And I found I was really able to distill my experience into easy to understand and easy to transmit kind of ideas that could allow actors to relax and give them what I call a truthful moment, because that's what you're looking for. Yes, you need technical knowledge. It helps if you know who the crew are, and it helps if you know where your frame is and where your mic is, and what your parameters are and how to hit your marks and all those kind of things. But you need to be able to be relaxed and truthful. So I was able to start breaking things down and get actors to be in the moment. So I started I've done kind of 3-day, 4-day, 5-day, up to 3-week courses with these various institutions, but I wanted to start doing my own. So 2 years ago, in fact, March 2020, I had my own course booked in the centre of Glasgow, and then COVID hit, so it was cancelled. So I've been doing online coaching since, screen acting, and doing online screen acting courses for RCS. So this one is a 3-day screen acting intensive, and it's the first one I've done independently. But I want it to be a kind of regular thing, and I want to develop a kind of conservatoire style approach where actors can come, I suppose effectively like coming to the gym for 3 days and keep working on their craft, because that's something that's different between the UK and America. So Charlize Theron, who has a couple of Oscars on her mantelpiece, still has an acting coach. So when she gets a role, she goes to her acting coach and they work on the role. Whereas British actors tend to be, well, I've trained, so I know everything. Just give me the script, I'll do the job.
British, got a British mentality.
It's that kind of entitled thing, that Americans don't seem to have as much of. So I want to create that space where actors of any range of experience, so the course I've got coming up this weekend here in Box Hub, is going to allow, I've got a range of different people. I've got guys 60-year-old who've got some credits under the belt, and I've got people of 19 who've only got a few. And so it's going to allow people to come exercise their creative muscles, find their own voice on camera, and just really get into the moment. Because my goal is, you've got to have a goal. Your character needs a goal.
You start with your why.
My goal is for these people to end the course and be able to deliver a relaxed, truthful performance. That's my goal for them. So when I check in with them on Sunday, we will have filmed at least one monologue and one scene, if not 2 monologues and 2 scenes, depending on how we get on. We progress with time, and they will be kind of living embodiments of a relaxed, truthful performance. And I'm inspired by that. I've found that what I used to get from acting, I still do get from acting, I'm now getting with my teaching. So working with young people who, taking my 25 years of experience now and distilling it down for them, watching them find that moment is a beautiful thing for me. I love that.
I think that's kind of like your self-actualization moment in terms of 25 years mastering your craft, the journey that you've been all the way, and even just the shift towards the end of your time in London, coming back up to Scotland in terms of working in an environment where you're helping people that have, are on the kind of the outskirts of society, and you've seen the change that you've been able to give to them, and now you want to pass on that knowledge potentially to all sorts of different kinds of people, and this is your kind of your kind of shift in terms of you've got all this knowledge, you want to pass it on and help
I do.
grow
I
the
want
next
to just
generation.
pass it on. I want to see people. I get such a buzz from watching. I was going to say young actors, but not that they might be just young in terms of where
Just
they
growing.
are in their career.
Yeah.
But watching them take a story, take a character, and find in a moment something truly unique and beautiful and surprising. You know, that's the best actors in the world. You know, Jack Nicholson always wanted to be in what he would call, you know, an uncomfortable position, because that's where the best actor. As soon as he was comfortable, he thought his performance was dead, you know. So if you take The Shining, for example, you know, he'd worked with Stanley Kubrick, and sometimes, you know, would only be given lines very, you know, close to the so you would just see them, get an idea what the scene's about, bang, you're in. And it's that, as an actor, you need technical knowledge, but you also need to be able to take that knowledge and forget about it and be in the scene. Because if I'm not present and I'm not listening, there's going to be no magic, there's going to be no spark. And the audience aren't going to buy it because they can see the wheels turning. They can see the actor wondering what his next lines are and if he's, you know, in the frame or not, or all that boring stuff. You know, nobody wants to see the wheels turn. Nobody wants to see the wizard behind the curtain. You know, they just want to see the magic. So
That's a fantastic way of looking at it. I think probably that's quite a nice way to frame in terms of what we've done. But I do have a few kind of questions for you that are just maybe a bit more off the cuff, given your experience. Number one, what is your favourite movie of all time?
Oh, gee whiz, that's a hard one.
Or you can give a few as long as you've got justifiable reasons why. Someone that's...
I think, well, I would say one of the greatest movies of all time for me is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah?
Yeah. Milos Forman, Jack Nicholson, and Louise Fletcher, just a beautiful, you know, it's perfection. There's not a beat wrong in it. There's not a syllable out of place. There's not a frame out of place.
I feel like it's got just flows.
It's a powerful, beautiful human story. The chief, the casting is perfect. I just love that film. I suppose if I was forced, if you're twisting my arm to choose one, I'm taking that. But up there, I suppose in my top five, I'd maybe put Midnight Cowboy. I'd probably put It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, okay, classic.
I would probably put Rocky.
Shrek?
Nah, I love Shrek. I wouldn't put it in my top five. What else? And I suppose another film that I absolutely love is the Godfather. Well, 1 and 2.
Yeah.
You know, 1 and 2. Yeah.
And if you could meet one person and have dinner with them, dead or alive?
One person, dead or alive. Do you know what? Bill Hicks.
Oh, the American
He's a comic
comedian guy. Yeah,
an amazing comic, taken way too young.
You know the movie Human Traffic?
Yes, they play Bill Hicks in there.
Yes. Is that the guy I'm thinking of?
That's the guy. It's just a ride. Yeah, he died at 34, although he looked a lot older. He'd lived quite a life.
34
He was only 34 when he died of pancreatic cancer in 1994, and I only discovered him, I think, just after he died. 1995, I think. I saw a video of the Channel 4 gig, Revelations, and I was blown away. And I consumed everything. I bootlegged. I got as much stuff. I ordered stuff from the States. This is pre-internet, remember? And I listened to everything that he did. He was a prophet, absolute genius of a comic, and yeah, love him.
Good stuff. And final one for this kind of set, death row meal, what are you having?
Oh, God. You know what? I would probably have like a really good homemade macaroni, cheese and chips. Yeah. Macaroni, cheese, chips and peas. That's me, I'm happy with that. And followed by banoffee pie for dessert. That's my favourite dessert. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, look, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and taking the time to speak to me today. I think, why don't you tell all the listeners and the viewers where they can find you, where they can find out a bit more about this course, you know, if they want to reach out to you, get in touch. I know that you're keen to kind of get involved with people and help them, so best place to find you.
So just go onto my website, I suppose, adamrobertson.com. There's information about the screen acting course on there, but you can contact me on adamrobertson.com or follow me on Instagram, adamrobertson09, which means there was obviously another 8 Adam Robertsons before I managed to get Adam Robertson 09. But yeah, the screen acting course is something I'm going to keep developing and running, so I'd love people to get involved with that and share it. There's one thing I'd love to plug though while I'm here. I did a feature film in November last year called Dreaded Light, which was writer Mark McNichol, his first debut feature film as a writer-director, filmed here in Scotland. It's a powerful story, really beautiful story, beautifully shot, and he's in the final stages of edit. And so if people go to markmcnichol.com, they can help support that because it's self-funded, or it was crowd-funded, and he's that close to the finishing line. So I'd love to see him get over the line with that. So that's Dreaded Light at markmcnichol.com.
Fantastic. And if there are any aspiring actors, actresses that have just watched this, and just want to learn a bit more about just acting or yourself, and maybe don't want to do the course this time, are you happy to kind of have people reach out?
Absolutely, get in touch with me. I mean, I get people emailing all the time, and I'm pretty good at trying to get back. I'm not always the quickest off the mark, but I usually do reply to people eventually. They get, whether it's a couple of weeks later, I always get in touch with people if they've reached out to me. So yes, young actors trying to think about what their next move is, reach out to me. Yeah.
Adam, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
And if anyone is watching this and would like to book this space, as Adam has done for the next few days, then just reach out to the page and we will be happy to have a chat about how we can help.